All right. Hi, Chukwuebuka. Thank you very much for meeting me and for doing this with me so we could discuss blessings and also talk a bit about your writing career. So yeah, hope you're good. How are you doing today?
Yes, I'm very well, thank you. And thank you, Michael, for doing this.
Okay, yeah. So I read this book last month and I shared some excerpts online and I also spoke with a couple of friends who had read the book and the general consensus is that this is a great book, especially for people who grew up in Nigeria and can relate to a lot of the things that you raised in the book, like homosexuality, the issues with gay rights in Nigeria, and the setting, which is the Nigerian boarding school setting that you also used to tell the story. And I'm just going to go straight into the questions I had while I was reading the book. And the first one starts with the relationship between Obiofuna and his father. I think the question I want to ask is what exactly was I mean, I think it's obvious, but it also like it begs the question: what were they trying to achieve when they sent Obiofuna away to boarding school? Was he in the hope that like whatever it is that he's going through? Because I'm guessing that the father must have thought about it that oh, this phase that you're going through would disappear the moment you maybe receive sense or you or you meet other people like you and everything. What exactly do you think? I mean, from as the author and as someone who probably understands a lot more about the Nigerian and the Igbo culture and everything, what do you think his father was going through at that moment when he decided he was going to send Obiofuna to a boarding school?
Yes, I think it's most of what you said. I think many reasons. One sort of come together. One of which is a tendency to, I would say in Nigerians, but really in human beings, to
Yeah.
um, think that if you put your quote unquote problems behind you or sort of far from you, then they don't exist or that they can fix themselves in the background. So I'm
Yeah.
thinking rather this is new to him. This is something
Yeah.
that he didn't want to deal with. So he thinks that if he were to send his son away to somewhere where he doesn't have to see him, the quote
Yeah.
unquote problem is going to fix itself in the background.
Mm.
There's also the fact that I like to point out because I do realize that there's the ha irony of it, of him trying to change his queer son and then taking him to an all boys boarding school. But I think there's also the aspect of religion in it. It's not just any boarding school; it's a religious boarding school, and so.
Mm.
Isn't it very Nigerian to sort of slap religion on things that you don't understand with the hopes
Yeah.
that then God will fix it? So he sends his son to this religious boarding school, hoping that, if he were to come in contact with God or Jesus, his life was going to change. And then finally, it's also that one of the things that he wants to teach his son, because he believes that his son is this way because of he's too in touch with his feminine side, he's too attached to his mother. And there's the belief that the best way to learn how to be a man is in the presence of other men. So he's hoping that exposing his son to this, what he knows is a very religious but also very toxic masculine environment, is going to basically brush him up and teach him how to
Mm.
be a man. So imagine that that's all the things that were going through Anozir's mind when he decides to send a Biafana to boarding school.
Yeah, and speaking of the relationship between Obiofuna and his mother, which you touched on, like bringing out this feminine side of him, I think it's very unique. I mean, I understand that a lot of people, I mean, maybe not a lot, but boys have relationships with their mother and everything, like good relationships. But for Obiofuna and his mother, it's like very different. There's almost like this connection, this unspoken, invisible connection between mother and son, and it was very strong, such that the moment his father took away from away like this, it actually affected the mother. So like, I mean, I reading kind of sensed some sort of a depression or like a detachment that happened. What was going on there? What were you trying to paint exactly with the mother-son relationship? Because I don't see that particular trope a lot in a number of African stories.
Yeah. I mean, first of all, I wanted to write a different kind of story. I wanted to write a story that about the parents that I don't read about a lot. I just don't think that the ambivalence of the response that parents have to these new discoveries in their children is often, in my opinion, exhaustively portrayed. So I didn't want to sort of write a mother character that was one dimensional, either one dimensionally good, which would be unrealistic, or one dimensionally bad, which might seem realistic. I wanted to write a story about the mother who genuinely loves and cares for her child, particularly also because of the circumstances into which Obiefuna was born. We see that the family was struggling. She had difficult pregnancies before Obiefuna arrived. So it's hard not to love a child that you took that hard to conceive and give birth to, and also a child that, in your opinion, according to your family law or superstition, sort of changed your fortune. I mean, tend not to love that child, even after you discover that that child is something that you would rather they are not. So I wanted to sort of create a mother who is loyal and loves her son, but is also resistant to his sexuality. And yeah, so that's basically what I was thinking about when I was sort of crafting their relationship. I wanted somebody who was on Obiefuna's side, maybe not, if not fully,
Mm.
but mentally on Obiefuna's side, to contrast his relationship with not just his father, but with the rest of the world.
Yeah, and what you said there about like Obiofina being this kind of, I mean, I guess that that's where the title of the book comes from, Blessings. There's this belief that when it came on, like things when it came into the family, things just changed for the better. Like, and his father repeatedly said is that this boy is a blessing to us and everything. And it's interesting how I mean everything turned upside down. Down the line. But yeah, it was very clear that before his coming into the family, there was this sort of desire for, I mean, obviously desire for a child, but even for other things like wealth and everything. But the moment he came on board, things just kind of changed dramatically. And yeah, moving on to the other parts of the story now, which is I think where the meat of things begin to happen when Obifuna is sent to boarding school by his father to fix his gayness, and then he meets people like Senior Papillo and a number of other people who shaped his developmental stage. About the relationship with Senior Papillo, what do you think was going on there? I personally sense some form of like Stockholm syndrome. As the writer, what did you see there? What were you trying to portray there with his relationship with Senior Papillo?
Yes, I think many things. So it's one of them is also just how negatively skewed a sense of a healthy relationship can be for many queer teenagers growing up in Nigeria, just because they've for the most part failed to get um so their interests are not allowed to take shape or evolve in the quote unquote normal way, the way a heterosexual teenager would. So I believe there's a greater tendency, for instance, to view dysfunction as the norm and to not see red flags when they come up. And so
Mm,
for Ipuna, it's that he's had very tenuous relationships, particularly with the men in his life growing up.
mm,
To find Senior Papillo, who was fundamentally an abuser, simply because he was getting crumbs of attention. He there's a part of him that realizes that this is wrong.
yeah.
He shouldn't be treated this way, but he doesn't also think that he can access better or that he deserves better. So to have Senior Papillo take an interest, especially because of who Senior Papillo is, one of the most feared, loved, whatever senior students in school, to have that kind of person take an interest in him, which is probably the very first time he's ever had anybody that matters outside of his mother take
Hmm.
that interest in him, is to welcome it, the consequences regardless. And it's also to view Senior Papillo's abuse as evidence of love, because in his opinion, I would say in his opinion, by now, the best way to prove that you love someone is to discipline them, because that's what his father has taught him basically.
Yeah, and there's always that correlation. I mean, in probably a lot of households, but particularly in African households, like this sandwiching love and hardcore discipline
Mm.
together at the same time and saying things like, "Oh, I'm doing this to you because I love you," and it echoes another like another like novel that I just remember, which is Chimamanda's Papa Hibiscus. How that Papa was like very like it was adamant on letting them know that I'm doing this because I love you. Like it hurts me as well, but like it's like this punishing you hurts me, but it's an act of love, and I think that particular trope, I mean, comes up again with Olufin and his father, and then when we get to the senior school with the seniors that he ends up like being with and everything. And then I also want to talk about Senior Kachi. I think we get to the point where Olufin as I mean, he's still struggling with his reality, his sexual identity at the same time, and then he meets someone like Senior Kachi who basically just uses him in a way for sexual pleasure and denies not just who he is or who he might be, but also let people know that I I detest the person that you are, just so you know, like I'm not in support of whatever it is that you're doing and everything. Do you think, I mean, was Nyokachi himself in a position of self-denial such that he's saying that thing to Obiofuna, but more to himself? So he doesn't, like, so he can tell himself that this is not who I am? Or was it the case that it was actually it was actually like in alignment with who he was at the point in the novel.
Maybe both, and I don't know. Increasingly with sexuality, I find that it's I'm not one of those people that have a very hard limit or definition of what sexuality is, because I really do think that it's fluid. It's very possible that any of the interpretations could suffice. It's very possible that he is in fact queer, but just doesn't want to accept it, and also almost resents Obiefuna because an Obiefuna is proof of his worst nightmares. It's a confirmation of his attraction, and so he finds a need to not just hurt Obiefuna with those words, but also to reassure himself that he's only doing this under the circumstance and he's not like Obiefuna. But then on the other hand, too, it's also very possible that he believes himself to be telling the truth and that he is doing this under the circumstances, and he wouldn't necessarily read otherwise. And I'm also, I don't know, increasingly I've been thinking about sort of the boundaries of sexuality and how homoeroticism can sort of function alongside homosexuality. And yeah, so it's hard for me to provide a definite answer basically as to what senior Kachi is.
And speaking of Homeritism, I think it's one of the things that we talked about before, because in the novel we see that I think the subtle introduction to who Obifina is or who Obifina might be is at the beginning of the novel when his father brings home this young lad and they begin to have like a form of relationship. And I think you had mentioned earlier that you did not think that I've forgotten his name now.
A boy.
that you did yeah, that you did not think that he was actually queer. Like that was just like a man to man like friendliness, which was maybe a bit too cordial, which is probably something that we don't see anymore these days because even men are kind of, I mean, there's this, oh, don't come too close, and everything. I mean, do you want to speak a bit about that? Because I don't think that I'm the only one who is surprised by that revelation, so to speak.
Yes. Again, that's also something that I've been thinking about. And man-to-man friendliness is such a funny way to explain it. But that's also something that I've been thinking. And also thinking about just how different cultures perceive things differently. I was speaking with my friends the other day, and we were talking about how in Nigeria, first of all, I was reading somewhere, for instance, that in India, up till today, men really hold hands. In France, I think men French kiss. And I was also speaking with my friends and telling them how I remember in Nigeria growing up how it was seen as completely normal for instance, you had a friend visiting, and both of you could lie on the same bed, like to sleep. But it's not done in the US apparently. Apparently in the US it's considered weird if you had a friend visiting and both of you slept on the same. So you literally had to get them a separate couch, like a couch or an air mattress, or literally anything but sleeping on the same bed. And people had very strong feelings about it. They were like, no, 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 it's just so weird. And I'm thinking, but it's not. In Nigeria, when I was visiting Nigeria, I was visiting my brother in Abuja. And I slept in his room. We both slept on the same bed. But apparently, if that was the US, that wouldn't happen. He would have to get me a couch because it would be considered weird. So it's interesting to me, basically, how perceptions of even queerness changes depending on cultures. For instance, in India, two men can hold hands and it's considered completely normal. But try that in the US and you would get odd looks. And I'm pretty sure there was a time in Nigeria in the past when you could do that. But do that
Yeah.
now and get odd looks. There was a time when you could show affection, very non-sexual affection, but do that now. Do even the slightest thing that hints at care, and it would be considered weird. And I shudder to think of where we are headed. But in the context of the book, there were many things, and of course, I get why people are perplexed whenever I say that I didn't envisage of a boy as a queer character. But really, that is the truth. I think, especially also because we don't hear a boy's voice.
Yeah.
Most of what we hear, other people see in a boy, whether that's Uzamaka or that's Obiefuna. But
Yeah.
particularly with Obiefuna, I conceived of a boy as simply a fodder to show Obiefuna's initial, to show Obiefuna coming into his own. And so a
Mm.
boy was simply just a projection of Obiefuna's feelings. And while it might seem that a boy did reciprocate those feelings, I really do think that most of what was happening was in Obiefuna's head. Most of the
Mm.
so-called love was in Obiefuna's head. And there's also when you also throw in the question of power, a boy was an apprentice. Obiefuna was Oga's son. So there's only so much power that a boy could sort of exert in that situation because he
Yeah.
also prefers to be in a way, so wouldn't want to do anything basically to annoy Oga. So there's all of that. So basically, the scene later down the book where Obefuna sort of walks into a boy in
Yeah.
what heterosexual setting for me wasn't an example of what happens often of queer people trying to pass. For me, that was a boy actually being himself. That was a boy being his own. Now that he's no longer in this household, and I realize now that perhaps I should have used sort of I should have clarified that in his head down the line, especially now that he's an adult and he understands better. Maybe there should have been a page or a paragraph where he has some sort of clarity to explain that. And I didn't do that, and that's on me. But yeah, I was hoping to use a boy to again show homoeroticism that isn't necessarily queerness.
Yeah, yeah, that surprises me. Like the point. I mean, yeah, it still surprises me to date, and thank you for clarifying that. I think speaking of homoeroticism, especially like again male friendliness, like I said earlier. I mean, when I'm reading Things Fall Apart, the relationship between Okonkwo and Obierika, that kind of speaks to that male friendliness. Not obviously maybe not hugging or whatever, but like there's a cordiality to it, so to speak. Like a there's a friendliness to it, just like you said. And again, of course, these things. I mean, culture itself is changing, even in Nigeria, and there's some level of friendliness that other people would. I mean, you get the looks as you mentioned earlier. So moving on to back to the book now. I think there's some part of Obiefuna's like life and the search, like obviously he's searching for something throughout the book, which is maybe he finds in the end, but it's like short-lived. But what would you say like throughout the book from when we realize that okay, this guy is born into this family up to the end when things just go very, I mean, just go sober and everything. What exactly was Obiofuna searching for in a boy, in Senior Kachi, in Senior Papilo, in every person that eventually maybe bees with, I mean, he eventually stays with or maybe falls in love with? What exactly was he searching for? Do you think it was like more of like an acknowledgement of his identity, or maybe an acknowledgement of the fact that okay, you can be loved as you are, or something else entirely that could be related to maybe his father or his mother? What would you say Obiofina was searching for throughout the book?
Wow. Again, both. And that's such a beautiful way to phrase the question. And what was the beef and searching for? I don't know. I think you said it. I think it's sort of an acknowledgement of his existence because he's been made all along from his father to boarding school. Every single relationship that he tries to foster has just been interpreted as wrong. The world has reacted very in a very hostile manner to him. And I imagine that Obiefuna is thinking, how can something that feels so beautiful to me be so wrong? And that's basically all the voice that he hears. His relationship with a boy is more or less violently cut short. And then when
Mm,
he goes to boarding school, his quote unquote relationship with Sine Papilo is jinxed by Sine Papilo himself. And then
yeah,
his relationship down the line with Sparrow is, of course, we see how that ends.
yeah,
So every single relationship that he's tried to foster, every healthy relationship that he's tried to foster has met with this kind of backlash that tells him that there has to be something wrong with him. So, but then at the same time, he's not just sitting around waiting for things to change. He's actively trying to change, but can't. So for him, it's trying to change, but also trying to find that one relationship where things are finally, at least internally, he's not getting that backlash that's now very sadly the core of his story. I think there's a line in the book that says something about maybe also this is also where I give a disclaimer because I don't know what he was searching for. And there's a line in the book that said he all along he didn't know he was searching, but when he met Mia B, he had the
maybe.
clearly relieving feeling of having found. And I imagine that just because of how different his relationship were with Mia B compared to the other two, then maybe the answer is found there. I think then it would be to get the answer to that question, it would be to determine how different his relationship was with Mia B compared to the other two to realize why he thinks he's found something now that he's been searching for all along.
Yeah, I mean, relationship with Miyabi was, I think reading that part, it felt very peaceful to read, very short-lived, like the entire portion of the book where things were looking very like sunshines and very rosy was that part at the end where he's with me and B and then there are friends around. And people are just meeting in the living room and they're having conversations, and it's just fun, and he doesn't have to keep looking over his shoulder, at least as long as it's within the context of that relationship. Obviously, that also doesn't last for long, and we'll get back to that later. But you mentioned Sparrow and how things just went sour with his relationship with Sparrow. There are some parts of the book, actually, when it comes to Obiefuna and Sparrow, that actually struck me. And one of it was when he was, I mean, after like making out with Sparrow, I would say it would be the word. And then the next morning, or like the next day, or whatever, the next time he sees Sparrow in the public, he doesn't feel confident, so to speak, to walk up to Sparrow or to show up to Sparrow. And I was thinking that that's probably because the last time he tried to do that was with Senior Kachi, and that did not end well, because Senior Kachi basically made me realize that I don't want to see you in daylight, basically. Like I like when you see me outside, you look away, and I look away from you as well. Like there's no acknowledgement of so whatever it is that we've done in the dark. But with Sparrow is carrying around the same energy that, okay, I know that we had a good time last night, but you probably don't want to say hi to me. And it changes entirely because Sparrow welcomes him and is like, hey, let's talk and everything. And that part made me feel really sad because it's like slowly Obiofuna is accepting a kind of love that is not whole as what love is. It's already bad enough that he thinks abuse is part of love with Senior Papilo and his father, and now he thinks this being totally unacknowledged or invisible even to your own lover in the public is also part of love. What did you think was going on there? I think you mentioned that there was some probably some level of classism also at work there as well. Can you share some light on that?
Yes, as I said the last time, I am buying your reading of that scene, and especially when you very intelligently contrast it with Senior Papilo. I'm sorry, Senior Kachi, because when he was with Senior Kachi, it was made clear to him by Senior Kachi that look, our relationship is going to have to exist in private, and I don't want to see you in public. And let's just pretend that we don't exist to each other in public. And so, in his understanding, that's the way now to be loved, or that's the way to maintain a relationship. You have to be comfortable with skulking in the shadows. And so when he meets Sparrow, he carries that thinking there too, that if he sort of makes himself visible, then he's going to lose the small
Yeah.
thing he has. So it's better to exist in private. And then when Sparrow actually reaches out to him, it's flexing to him and he doesn't even know what to do with that. So there's that, but there's also really the classism of it, which works very in a very interesting way in boarding school, and how especially in high school, when cliques are being formed, some cliques form and consider themselves the coolest boys in class, or sort of the however it is that they're able to stratify themselves. They consider themselves to be sort of cut out from the rest of the class, and they maintain it's really how society works, and then they sort of maintain that orbit, and they don't want to saturate themselves. And Obiefuna is not cool, or not cool enough at least, as this boy, so he doesn't want to ruin his tease further by sort of ingratiating himself to them and being turned down flat publicly.
Yeah.
So again, it goes back to just being used to being invisible, that you're shocked and perplexed when visibility is extended to you. And even the thought
Yeah.
of visibility being extended to you is just sad, but that's what it is.
Yeah, it is sad. And I mean, eventually, again, the relationship doesn't last, which is like a recurring theme in this entire novel. It's like for Obiefuna, who is obviously representative of queer people in Nigeria, or in places like Nigeria where there's no room for such to flourish. Like there's no lasting love for you. It's like there's a constant reminder. I mean, that's what I was getting tried, because like we're introduced to this new character, and like, oh yeah, this looks like it could go somewhere, and it's like, of course it doesn't last again, because and it's terrible with Sparrow because they are caught in the act, and it's like Obiofuna runs and obviously Sparrow does not run, and Sparrow is caught and is expelled and all of these things. And there is this thing where Obiofuna, I mean, he meets Sparrow and he's like, oh, please don't tell them that it is me and everything. And I understand why he had to do that, because obviously there's fear and everything, but I also felt just, I don't know, deeply disappointed that he felt the need to say that, because it's like, of course, Sparrow is not going to rat you out, because I mean there was something going on here. It also makes me wonder if Obiofuna himself even felt loved by Sparrow, because it's like, or is it just that you is like, even if somebody loves me, they can still rat me out? Or what do you think must have been going on in his mind in that particular moment?
Terror, I imagine. Just he was just terrified. And when you're terrified, you're not even thinking. Because this was literally the reason why he was brought here. So imagine him being expelled for that same reason. His father would kill him. So he's terrified and he's not thinking straight. But also, there's no way to know that Sparrow wouldn't rat him out, especially because of the kind of pressure that Sparrow was under.
Mm.
Sparrow was being, I imagine, was being punished daily, was being flogged daily, was basically being put through the ringer to expose the other person. So, and even Sparrow could have even gotten a lesser crime or punishment, pardon
Yeah.
me, if he had given Obiefuna up. So there was no, I think, again, it's going back to that thing where Obiefuna expects him to talk because he doesn't know why he wouldn't speak. He doesn't, you're right, he doesn't feel that somebody would love him that much to want to protect him in that manner. And so basically, even if he's sort of confused, a part of him believes that Sparrow wouldn't rat him out, but a part of him is also doubtful because why? Why would Sparrow not? There's no motive for Sparrow not to. So just to be on the safe side, he's just checking in, I think. On the staircase, just checking in to make sure that we're still on the same side.
Yeah, and I think when we begin to move out of the context of the secondary school is when, I mean, this very heartbreaking thing where Festus, who everyone has known to be, oh, is always acting very feminine, is not being masculine, is not enough in a boys' school for that matter, and there's this thing where the boys gang up to beat him up, and I think I mean, I feel like two things probably happened there that kind of hit me. The first one is the fact that Obafuna must have realized in that moment that his friends are actually homophobic. Even in that moment, are actually not accepting of him, even though they obviously don't know. If they ever did, this is probably what would have happened to him. And also, the second thing that broke me there was the fact that he himself participated, which again is probably from a point of weakness and it's also like a point of like, I want to protect myself. But it just felt so sad saying that because even Festus mentioned it to him that, I mean, you have to know that this could be you someday and everything. And what do you think about that? The fact that Obiofuna is put in this position where not only does he have to hide and deny himself, he even has to like join the part of the opposition, so to speak, just to survive. Uh, is the word. What do you think about that? Like, what was going on there exactly?
Yes, I mean like that scene was so important because isn't it the bane of many queer people in life? I just feel like masculinity sometimes can just be an endlessly exhausting tirade of having to prove something. Having to prove just a continuous exhausting need to prove and prove and prove because some and Obiefuna realizes the reason why Obiefuna joins in that is that he realized that sometimes merely existing because he's somewhat different from Festus. I think Festus is more um effeminate than Obiefuna
Yeah.
is. And so in that way, Festus is more vulnerable than Obiefuna.
Yeah.
But then Obiefuna realizes that, oh, wait a minute, at least with the way that this is going, just merely being alone might not help anymore. I might need to do something again now to prove myself to the boys, which is why he does that. But so yeah, I wanted to show just how somebody can be a victim and a villain at the same time. I don't necessarily believe that queer people are perfect or angels.
Yeah.
So we see that Obiefuna sort of gives into that peer pressure. Even if he's giving into that peer pressure, he's making a choice, and in my opinion, that makes him a villain. Um, that's one. And then number two, I also wanted to show just how just that very sad thing of how sometimes minorities can sometimes tacitly contribute to their own marginalization.
Mm.
And that need to think that if you play by the rule of the majority, you'll be accepted by the majority. What Obefina fails to realize is that he's only been accepted by that majority because they really think he's one of them. And
Mm.
then second, they realize, wait a minute, you are not one of us. Even if he supports them, even if he's on their side, the second they realize that he's actually, in fact, not one of them, they will turn on him. And I
Yeah.
feel like that's one thing that people often fail to, but people, especially in minority groups, often fail to realize. And I understand, I am sympathetic to how exhausting it can be being a minority and having to be an activist all the time. And sometimes you just want to live and just be. But at the same time, too, the being of being a minority is that you will never be one of the majority. Like literally, unless you are miraculously able to change yourself, you will never be one of them. And if they were to find out that you are, if they were to find out somehow that you are not one of them, you will never be given special treatment. So yeah, it's sort of what Festus tells Biafra at the end, that any other day, given any other circumstances, this could have very well been you. So don't even think that you're different from me or that you're better than me simply because you belong with them today.
Yeah, and it's so that part is so important to me because it's very like it mirrors other parts of, I mean, the society. Even like there's a sense of this male solidarity that you see happen everywhere, even on social media, like on Twitter, for example. You just see it's like there's just this. I mean, like you said about masculinity just being this exhausting, endless need to prove that this is what a man is supposed to do. So it's like, oh, if they're maybe embarrassing somebody on Twitter, you just feel the need to contribute, even though you don't know why. You just feel like, oh, my guys are doing it. I should definitely do it and everything. And just like you said about minority groups being like in some way indirectly or even sometimes directly contributing to their own oppression. You even sometimes see if, for example, there are conversations happening where about maybe feminism and misogyny, you see some women even actively say things like, "Oh, I'm not in support of feminism." Yeah, this is literally what is happening here. It's like you're contributing to your own oppression, even though it's not clear to you or you might not know it, you might not acknowledge it. It's like this is actually what is happening, and yeah, it's probably one of those things about being a minority or maybe an oppressed group, so to speak. Moving on now away from the high school setting, I think there's some sense in which the relationship between Obiofuna and his brother kind of gets better, so to speak. I know we've not talked about his brother at all, and I did see the relationship, and it was a bit. I mean, it's like I can understand that kind of relationship because also, I mean, growing up as the guy who does not particularly play football and do the exact thing that people are expected, like as a guy, you're expected to. That's the thing you're expected to do for your father to be proud of you and everything, and which is what happened in the book where Biofuna's father basically just switched sides the moment he realized that Biofuna is not the son that he wants him to be. And that kind of also affects the relationship between the brother. And that changes eventually where, I mean, this thing where he is allowed to, his brother encourages him to dance and he dances in front of his brother and everything. Uh, Looking at the relationship between both of them, how do you think maybe what message were you trying to pass across exactly? Because I think it was very important, and that resolution of him dancing in front of his brother was also very important to the story. But I want to hear your thoughts on what exactly you were trying to achieve there.
First of all, I thought that Obafina had been through enough. He has been through a lot, and he needed relief in whatever form. Thankfully, his brother was available. But also, I think that and you're right that there has been a lot of sibling rivalry going on in the book. Contributed in large part to the way the parents treat them, and not just Anozie, but Uzamaka too. That Uzamaka is clearly Uzamaka's favorite,
Yeah,
for obvious reasons, and Ekene is also clearly Anozie's favorite for obvious
yeah,
reasons, and that has a way of affecting the relationship between the brothers. Particularly also because I feel like they both resent. It's hard for them not to resent each other for what the other excels at and and the other fails at.
mm,
So Ekene, for instance, might hold resentment for Biafuna for how well he does in school, yeah, and how loved he is by the mother. And of course, Obiefuna resents Ekene even more for everything else, how well Ekene does with people, how well Ekene is received or approved by the dad, and just how much of a man Ekene is in a way that Obiefuna feels like he isn't.
yeah,
And Ekene is going up to be the dream, not just of the father, not just of their dad, but also of society. And
yeah,
Obiefuna presents that ease that he has. And so most of their growing up have been filled with unstated tensions. And so I needed them to finally be friends. I needed them basically to finally see each other. And
mm,
I needed also to sort of foster some kind of solidarity
mm,
between them. And again, I needed also to emphasize this thing of familial love. And maybe also it's just because I grew up with a very sort of small, close-knit family of people who I genuinely love me and I love them. So it's hard for me to, and I know of course that it exists, but it's hard for me to imagine that somebody can just genuinely hate their family member. Again, I know that it exists, but it's just not what I'm used to. I grew up and I'm used to family who genuinely cares about you, really, no matter what. So it was just instinctive that I would also write that in my fiction, to write brothers who, even if they have a test relationship between them, even if they sort of resent each other occasionally, have fundamental love for each other, and I wanted a scene to show that.
Yeah, and I think you did a wonderful job of that, to be honest. That thing warmed my heart because, like you said, we had just been going through the, the trenches with Obefuna and his relationship life and everything. So it felt good to have that, especially because his mother was dying, his father was already like, I had given up on Anozie, I'm not even gonna lie. So seeing that the brother was actually like welcoming of him and that conversation where they're like, oh yeah, I mean you used to do this, you used to be so good at this and like oh you used to be so good at this and yeah that felt very good to me and I think a lot of again, Nigerians who probably read this can relate to that because there's a way in which the way African parents who are very disciplinary and bring up their children, the way affect the sibling relationship when the siblings eventually grow up and everything. And yeah, moving on to the part of the book where things got a little bit better, which is when Obiofuna meets Maybe and he finds this circle of people and they have this like amazing short-lived relationship and that felt very good for me until obviously again things end in a very sad way with me and his parents saying that okay like you need to settle now and everything. I think the first thing I want to ask exactly is that I mean you did say that you hoped that this ending was like a bit like hopeful in a way, but it makes me wonder again because it's like a cycle of Obefuna find someone, if like someone, you miss someone, and then the person goes away again and everything. And I cannot help but think that's probably what's happening again. Now, wherever he is now, probably still repeating this cycle and everything. It's probably with another person again and everything and all that. And for someone like me, if it seems to me like a well-grounded character who was an adult, he knows what he's doing and everything. And I did not think that it would go down that trajectory of oh, you have to do what your mother does is saying again. But I think it just boils down to how strong the cultural like influence is and how people don't want to just disappoint their family. But I want you to talk a bit more about that, about me maybe as a character and how things just went down for him as a person.
Yes, all that. I mean, not wanting to disappoint your family, not wanting to go against your culture, but also the law. Let's not forget the law, because it's around the
Mm,
time. I think it's wise to contextualize when he got married and the fact that
mm,
he's been able to hold off his parents and the culture for this long. This is not, it's not today that they said that's forcing him to get
mm.
married, basically,
Yeah,
or impressing it upon him to get married. I imagine it has been happening for the last 10 years even, but he hasn't succumbed. And all of a sudden there's a law. I do think that the law at the time at least, because maybe now people no longer are no longer as terrified, but I do believe that at the time it was new.
yeah,
Tensions
yeah.
were high. So
14 years.
exactly, for there was there was a prison term, so the fear was much more palpable then,
Yeah,
and the stakes all of a sudden seemed higher. Meanwhile, while in the past it would have just been facing the family's disapproval, facing cultural disapproval, risking estrangement, and all of that, all of which you can
yeah,
deal with. There's now the legal implication. There's now the fact that, and of course, again, you could say that well, he didn't have to get married and nothing would happen. I think it's also he's also getting older, and so it's now time to sort of contextualize a lot of things and to
mm,
lot of things into perspective and to
yeah,
also realize, well, it's going to take at least 10 to 20 years for this law to be repealed. And so he just had to do something. I think he's fought for so long that he's just tired of fighting now. And so he's giving in. But
yeah,
as for Biafuna, and yes, while that is devastating for Biafuna, imagine that Miebi was doing what was best for him, but also what on the other hand, what isn't good for society, and of definitely isn't good for the poor wife involved. But for Biafuna, imagine that he is I'm thinking that he learns from every encounter or every situation that he finds himself in. For instance, Kachi, we never see him. In fact, after Senior Papilo, for instance, we never see him get with another kind of Senior Papilo. He gets with Senior Kachi, but Senior Kachi is different from Senior Papilo. At least Senior Kachi did show him actual physical affection, even if that was then turned away. The Senior
yeah,
Papilo didn't. And then Sparrow showed him physical affection without the baggage that Senior Kachi
yeah,
came, and then Miebi showed him an actual relationship. So
yeah,
what Sparrow gave, but this time actually defined. So who knows? Hopefully, it just goes uphill from there. Maybe the next person Obiekuna would meet would give him everything, including marriage.
yeah. I hope that's wherever he is now. And yeah, thank you very much, Chukwuebuka. I want to talk a bit about your writing journey now, away from the book. This is like your first novel. But I mean, I know that there are people that will be watching are probably writers, maybe in Nigeria or whatever. And can you just maybe walk me through your writing journey in as much detail as you can give from when you started writing and when you decided that you're going to write this book. I read somewhere that during the lockdown, I think you finished writing during the lockdown, or you started during the lockdown. I read that particular essay or interview, so to speak, and I was like, interesting. I want to know more about your journey into becoming a writer. So yeah, can you maybe walk me through that a bit?
Yes. So as for being a writer, I think that I had just been doing it for quite a while from when I was really young. I don't remember an exact time when I started writing. And like my early memories are like me in school, in my primary school, just writing in a notebook. Sometimes when the lesson was even going on, and also just being thrilled whenever we had a literature period, and even more thrilled when it was a double literature period. I think sort of the cliche, I was one of those children that loved to read, and so my writing was sort of reactionary. It was in response to what I was reading and my needs to fill in the questions that the books were not providing, in my opinion, adequate answers to, and also
Mm,
just to explore my imagination. I was also a very chaotic child with a wild imagination, and I wanted to be
mm,
able to capture them on paper. But as for this book specifically, really was the writing process of this book was miraculous in a way,
mm,
because I had been envisioning the book for a while. I always wanted to write a book that was set during sort of the Same-Sex Marriage Prohibition Act, and to understand, first of all, why it was passed, and what life has been for minority communities in Nigeria since then. But it's, of course, like every other writer too. I just kept thinking it. I had written it in my head, just not on paper, because of one thing or the other, and every distraction known to man. And then, luckily, miraculously, at the height of the pandemic in 2020, I had published a short story earlier in Lowway, and it had sort of done the rounds on social media, and I was getting a lot of very positive, flattering feedback. And then one day I get an email from an editor from Penguin Random House, and she says that she's read the story, she likes it, and she wanted to know if I was working on a novel that she would like to publish. And that was the motivation I needed to begin the novel. I basically moved back to my campus apartment since we were closed. I shut my door and I would write from morning till night, until I had a final draft of the book, and it just took off from there.
well, so the process was like, I mean, publishing that short story kind of like opened that door for that motivation and everything. That I did not see that coming because not that's not a common trajectory that I hear about and everything. Speaking on writing still, and particularly writing this novel and obviously getting published, what would you say is like? I mean, especially when it comes to the connection between writing and getting published, which is the big like deal for most people in the sense that just like you said, a lot of writers must have been writing for like maybe a very long time, or some of them are writing for like maybe since they were children and the likes, and then gets to the point where as an adult you're like, okay, you understand how it works now. People actually get their stories published, and then you want to get your stories published and everything. If you have, I mean, maybe advice for the Nigerian writers or people who are just living, just trying to put their story together, maybe even a kind of a taboo story, because in the context of the country where you're from, this like, oh, you shouldn't be writing about this. What advice would you have for people who are just trying to write and get published from Nigeria or from Africa?
I mean, I think that, and I understand, I really do understand sort of the trepidation involved. It is a heavy
Yeah,
subject. You are going to get backlash. Not everybody is willing to sort of be out in the public eye that way,
yeah,
or have to deal with that. It's easier not to deal with, to be honest. So at the end of the day, it really just boils down to, if you want to write on a particular topic, it really just boils down to being being able to deal with it. There's no that it's really, it is or it isn't. There's really no other tip. Okay, maybe a tip would be use a pseudonym. Using a pseudonym would also mean that you wouldn't stand in front. It depends on what you want, I guess,
yeah.
ultimately. If you simply just want this story to be put out there, and you want people to read it, and you really don't care about being the face of the story that you're putting out, then by all means use a pseudonym. I think that's allowed. In many journals, I believe, would even publish you with a pseudonym if that's what you want. But then if you do want to be in front, especially I can imagine if it's an excellent story that you wrote and it's doing so well and you want the credit, as you should, then it's tricky. You have to choose one. You have to choose to either back out and allow the story do its around anonymously, or get in front of it. Thankfully, I would say that the literary scene, I really do think that, of all our cultural scenes in Nigeria, or entertainment, music, film, and literature. I think literature is the most progressive and the most
Yeah.
liberal. So you really would get readers. You really would get a space. I feel like the literary scene would carve out a space for you in a way that music might not, or
Yeah.
film might not. Although I think film, thankfully, is slowly changing. But yes, it's doable, and that's what I'm hoping that this book would do for many readers and writers alike. That they would see that it's. I'm not even a pioneer. I'm thinking there were so many people that have done this before me.
Yeah.
Marine Zephyr Kando to Abidare, I believe. To
Yeah.
I don't know if it's Abidare now, but Chinelo Okparanta,
Chinelo Parenta. Yeah.
Ulhosa Osunde, Akweke Emezi. Many people, have written books with queer characters in the past that have been well received. And I was just hoping that Blessings would join that canon, and that many other writers and readers would read this and feel even more inspired to be able to tell diverse stories, not on a particular topic, but just in writing in general. My advice really would be to read. You cannot be a good writer without being a good reader. Read as widely as possible. Read everything published. Thank God there are many newer magazines popping up. Read the stories, read the poetry. If you like something by an author, find out more things that they've written and read as widely as possible, and then try to do what you've read. Writing, like all forms of art, sort of imitations in some way. You read something that you like, and then you try to recreate that thing that you love. Of course, not to copy, not to plagiarize the thing, but to learn the craft of that thing. I think increasingly, I'm also really a very strong advocate of the MFA. And I know that people often have their reservations about it, and valid reservations, and also that I also do agree that it can be a kind of significant brain drain mechanism. But it really does have its benefits in creating, especially if you really want to learn the fundamental craft of writing. And I do think that the workshop and the community that it produces can be helpful to a writer. So yeah,
Mm.
I would say apply to those grad schools, secure that funding so that you can dedicate 2 years or 3 years of your life to strictly writing. There's so much that you can do in that period of time. Write as much as you can. Write something and rewrite it. Write and revise it over and over and over until you think it's in its best shape. And then send it out. Send it out to magazines. Send it out to friends to read. If you get rejections, which you will get because it's just part of the process, polish it and you send it out again. Send it out to prizes. I really do admire literature in Nigeria and how it functions because I think it's also one of those areas where you don't need connection or you don't need to know anybody really to put yourself out there. Just write something. People cannot deny good writing. The time you'd have wasted in trying to get clicks or gangs or whatever that is, just invest it in actually reading and writing something good, and you will be found ultimately.
Yeah. Thank you very much for that. That's really wonderful. Yeah. Thank you for talking to me. I actually enjoyed this conversation thoroughly. Yeah. If anyone is interested, maybe you've not even read the book, this is Blessings by Chukwuebuka Ibeh, and you can get this in, I would say, the bookstore near you. Because anytime I walk around in London, I'm always seeing, I'm always seeing copies of Blessings. I'm like everywhere, like interesting, love it. So that's always good. So yeah. Any last words? Anything before we end?
No, no, thank you so much, Michael. I know that we had done this before, and thank
Yeah.
you for your willingness to do it again. And I really appreciate all the sort of the love and support.
All right. Thank you very much, Chukwuebuka.